Thanks for having me.
I'm just going to ask an open-ended question. Why are you deciding to drop out?
Yeah, no, it's the right question for the moment, that's for sure. The reason to drop out is this. We have a path forward, and I just want to make it clear. There's a lot of resources being spent in this race right now, and I think what I've tried to do throughout this campaign and what my wife and I wanted to do when we set out in this campaign is provide real solutions and say that we have to do things appreciably different. But as we sit here today, in order to have a path to victory, it is necessary for me and those who support me to really go negative and to go on the attack against the other two primary candidates in this race. And that's just not where my wife and I, our heads are at. We don't think that's the right path. The stakes are such that we have to win in November. We have to beat Tony Evers. What the policies and the ideas that are coming from the left are so corrosive in so many different ways that I don't think that going on a full-throated attack over the last month of the primary is the right call at this point. And so at every stage of this primary and at every stage, I have attempted to always lay out solutions. And I think where we heard such positive feedback from the grassroots around the state, or people that were paying close attention to the race, was they appreciated that was always kind of the driving animus of our campaign of here's the problem with education, here's why universal school choices can give leverage back to families. So part of my urge in doing this, and I should say I'm not going to endorse either one of the primary candidates. I'm not going to bash them on this show either. But my urge to them is this, that the thing I heard so often from people around the state they appreciated about my campaign and what I said was I was really trying to articulate why conservative ideas are going to help to get us out of the mess that we're in. And my urge to them as they close out this campaign is that they carry that forward and they do the same.
Your campaign and the dynamics of the race changed when Tim Michels got into the race. It looked like this was going to be a campaign between you and Rebecca Clayfish, and you made it clear that you were running as an outsider. Michels entered the race late and has carpet bombed the state with massive amounts of advertising on radio and television. And your campaign, I'm sure, does some polling. We have the statewide Marquette University law poll, and it showed the race boiling down to Clayfish and Michels being very close, and you were rather distant third. Did the Michels campaign, in retrospect, Michels' decision to get in and spend so much of the money that he has, was that a fatal blow for your chances?
Well, it certainly put us in a position where the only way forward was to be negative. I think there's no doubt about that. And, I mean, Tim's spending a lot of money. There's no two ways about it. It's a rate approaching close to $1 million a week, which in the grand course of Wisconsin primaries, that's pretty unprecedented. So, yes, of course it's had an effect and an impact. And I don't put it so much in the category as, like, stops any possibility of moving forward, but I definitely put in the category of now all of a sudden you have to do a different kind of vetting of your primary opponent. And not to get too much into political strategy here, but like you have a decision to make as a candidate, you know. And I think if you would have talked to me when I was a younger person and you tell me I was sitting here today about to suspend a gubernatorial campaign where we felt like we really did have the best answers to the problems that we face and the best shot of beating Evers, I would have been incredibly heartbroken as a young person thinking, oh my gosh, how could you do this? But, you know, with age comes wisdom, and I sit here today, and I said this in debate last week, like, God's got a plan. You don't get to control the variables. And sometimes you have to look at, you know, what are the true long-term victories versus the short-term victories.
Yeah, and when you entered the race, there were not even any rumblings that Tim Michels or Tommy Thompson might get in. You made a commitment to get in. First of all, you really never went away after your United States Senate campaign. You're involved in the Better Friend Corporation and have been active doing grassroots stuff in the state of Wisconsin. But when you chose to enter this race, it was before there was a notion of a self-funded candidate who would be putting, you know, multi-millions of dollars into his own race. Had you known then what you know now, perhaps you might not have chosen to run in the first place. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a good question to ask. You know, I'm pretty hard-headed at times. I think if you would have told me, just being honest with you, that someone was going to come in and spend this much money, I probably would have told you, you know what, I got the right message. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to test my thesis. And And I'll be honest with you, before I got in, and you're right, there was no rumblings of a Tim Michels or anybody else running. Certainly plenty of people told me it was impossible for us to beat Rebecca Clayfish. And I said, well, actually, I think that a message on the fact that we have to do things very differently. And here again, I'm not on this show to take shots at Rebecca or Tim, but I did say I believe very thoroughly that there's going to be a huge appetite amongst the Republican electorate for that, and plus the general electorate too. And boy, that thesis has proven correct as we sit here today. And we saw huge traction in our own race. Again, before Tim got in and started spending a lot of money with a very similar message. And again, not taking shots here, but calling it out for what it is. The political reality is what it is, and that forces you in a position where you really do have to go negative. And I just don't think that's the best thing for our state or our movement at this point.
Yeah, some things to me are real obvious. And when you saw someone like Tommy Thompson decide that even he might consider running, and Tim Michels was considering running, the reason for that is everybody thinks Tony Evers can lose. This is setting itself up to be maybe a major national Republican year, and someone who may not be willing to put up tens of millions of their own money to lose a general election, they believe that Evers is vulnerable. I do agree with you. You're not that old, even though you talk about with age comes wisdom. I think had you decided whether the shots were legitimate or not, decided to go negative on either of your two main opponents, you would have essentially poisoned your own name for any future activity in the state of Wisconsin. I've commented here that my fear has been that this race would get negative because, while you may have different areas of disagreement and your solutions might be a little different, on 99% of the issues, you're all very, very close together. And when there isn't sizable difference on the issues, that leads to personalities, comments on background, and the next thing you know, somebody's going after you because you were once a Democrat, and you're going after Tim because of something. And you end up doing the dirty work for the Democrats. So if you have a long-term political future, I think you would have poisoned it by going negative here. So that's my next question here. I'm assuming that you still have an interest in serving an elective office. You certainly found an avenue for yourself with the No Better Friend Corporation in dealing with a couple of issues that, frankly, nobody was touching, particularly involving the schools and critical race theory and so on. Are you open to doing something political in the future?
Yeah, and this is a conversation I have to have with my wife, and she might join us here. She might be calling in right now, so Paul can patch her in because she might want to play a role here. But no, honestly, like right now, I think we have to take time, recollect, and I know this comes across as a cliche, but really, honestly, like I am very much looking forward to spending time with my wife and kids. And then the one thing I can promise you is this: I am never going to stop caring about my state, my country, the future. I know sometimes people like to take shots at me in politics, but like that whole thing, like, I do this stuff for the same reason that I joined the Marine Corps. I mean, I really did join the Marine Corps in the middle of two wars. It's because I thought like that's the thing I should do. And I look at this mess that our society has become, and I see the craziness coming out of the Democrat Party at this point. And like, you got to stand up and try and do the right thing. And how does that manifest in the future? I don't know exactly. And I mean that sincerely today. I do not know. I know that I did feel like this race was the right way to have a real impact for the people of Wisconsin. It didn't work out the way that we would have liked. Sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles, and that's life. But yeah, no matter what, I'm going to care. And I'm so proud of what No Better Friend has done, to your point, to really kind of crystallize what we have to do to defeat things like critical race theory, to get our schools back on track. I'm glad that these other candidates are talking about universal school choice. I don't pretend I'm the first person to talk about school choice. I'm not. Our state has a long legacy in it, but I do think we help to drive this home as the solution that helps to really empower families to get their kids out of crazy. And so we'll continue to push that.
Do you resent Michels coming in and essentially buying his way into front-runner status here? I mean, he didn't do the grassroots stuff that you've done over the last couple of years. He has the legitimate answer, no, I was running a company and I was involved in business and so on. But the reality is, if Tim Michels wasn't extremely wealthy, you can't jump into a race 3 months before the primary and run 2 spots an hour on the Mark Bellings show and zillions of spots on TV and radio all over the state. Do you resent the way that he is perhaps winning the nomination?
Resent's not the right word. Your description of how this is happening is true and accurate. And so I think I take a clear-eyed view where, again, I kind of talked about like how my younger self would view this, whereas where I view this now today as like, you know, God does have a plan, and like you just don't get to decide like every variable that's going to touch you in the process of this, and that's a big part of this too, right? Like I feel like I will always, and I said this to my kids before we talked to them today to tell them that we're going to suspend the campaign. We talked to the team, and what I said to my kids is, look, in a time of really real craziness and intense negativity in our country, I hope and pray that when you look back on these news clippings from many years later, and this will include the 2018 campaign and this campaign, and if anything comes in the future, and you can be proud of what your mom and dad said and how we handled really divisive and difficult issues. And so I'm very proud of that. And at the end of the day, if somebody is going to come in and spend a boatload of money on a race, I don't get to stop them from doing that. It's a free country.
You had most of the ads that I saw for Kevin Nicholson for governor were run by a third-party political action committee, whereas Michaels' ads are being run by the Tim Michaels campaign, which is largely his own funds. Rebecca Clayfish, as a former lieutenant governor and significant backing from a lot of Republicans, has raised a fair amount of money on her own and had a political action committee. But your support and the ads that we saw most of the time were coming not from your campaign, but from a third-party group. And that means you can't tell them how to communicate. By law, you can't coordinate a message here. So without regard to which way you wanted to go, your only hope was to have outsiders, and the number one outsider, I believe, funding your third party or your political action committee, which you don't control, was Dick Uihlein, that you've got somebody else trying to control a message because you've got two candidates that are simply better funded than you. I don't know if that's healthy or not, but it's reality. It's the way things were, and it sounds like that had to play into your decision making.
For sure, yeah. Campaign finance is such a convoluted, messy world, and you know, outside ads, and we're highly appreciative of all the support from grassroots to volunteers to our team to our outside group and everybody that was helping along. Greatly appreciate all of it. But you're right. Like, look, outside groups can only do so much, limited by law, as is your ability to communicate to them. They can see what you say publicly, and they can try to emulate that as best they want to. But there's no replacement for going on the TV and somebody speaking to a camera directly. And the way our campaign finance is set up is that everybody else is limited as to what they can donate, how they can pitch in. And if you yourself have a fortune to spend, you can spend it. And again, I'm not arguing against it, but that is the way the system works, and it can be very, very difficult to navigate that. And no doubt, resources were tough in this campaign. I always knew that would be the case in the Wisconsin gubernatorial primary because it's just harder to raise money for a gubernatorial primary because your universe of donors is smaller than a Senate race. So we knew that would be a challenge, and that's life. And yes, a lot of the donors were certainly on board with Rebecca Clayfish early on, and I know the Walkers played a big role in supporting her and encouraging their donors to as well, which is their right to do. But that made it hard. Where I always felt like we were really winning it is, and I was always told this, when people heard me speak and they could hear me answer a question, that's when they would give me their support. And the question is, how do you get that to scale? And certainly that was a struggle in this campaign. But again, a struggle that we took a clear-eyed view of and decided that the best route forward was not to encourage negativity, but to allow the movement to go forward.
Some people are going to say that this is a loaded question. Others will say it's a biased question. Well, it may be both, but it's a good question. The reality is, as I look at this, the three of, and even including Tim Ramthun, the four of you, are excellent candidates. Tim Michaels is a very smart guy who's been involved in public policy and in running a company. Rebecca Clayfish was an excellent lieutenant governor of the state, has a grasp of public policy, has toured the state. You are an extremely smart guy. I had a listener asked me last week, well, I want to elect my choice for governor. I want Wisconsin's Ron DeSantis. And I said, well, and she was asking me who she should support, Tim Michaels or Rebecca Clayfish. I said, well, if you want Wisconsin's Ron DeSantis, you want Kevin Nicholson. It's clear that's what that is. But you could just see by her question that this was boiling down in the minds of voters to a two-person race. Anyway, the point that I wanted to make is the Republican field here, as Republican fields generally are filled with very attractive candidates. You take a look at the companion major primary going on in the state, in August, the Democratic primary for the United States Senate. You have a state treasurer who nobody's ever heard of, who's trying to buy her way into the race with money that was comes from the wealth of a husband who has a tainted background in terms of the financial services industry. You have a lieutenant governor in the state who can't tell the truth about anything and just trash the United States of America. And you have a trust fund baby who barely knows his way around the state of Wisconsin, whose daddy is trying to buy him a Senate seat just like he bought an NBA team. The reality is, and you see this in legislative races as well, the Republican candidates that are running are simply better than a lot of Democratic candidates that were running. If you had the Republican equivalent of Mandela Barnes or Alex Lasry to run against, you wouldn't be dropping out of this race. But when Michaels entered, you have somebody very popular among Republicans, very well known among Republicans in Clayfish, and somebody in Michaels who has a very good message and the resources to be able to put it out. So I think of, in the sports analogy, what you want to be in is a bad division. The Brewers have only one team to beat in their division, and right now I think the Republican division is very, very strong. Just your general thoughts on that. I just think that right now the individual candidates that Republicans are putting up, not just in Wisconsin, but particularly in Wisconsin, is just stronger than what the Democrats have to offer. If they had a better candidate for the United States Senate than Alex Lasry or Sarah Godlewski or Mandela Barnes, they'd be running.
No, I agree. And I mean, what the Democrats have, and you know this too, is they've got a tailwind that comes from the media, the national media, the mainstream media, and it comes from entertainment. And, Moynihan once said it, right? Politics is downstream from culture. And Democrats and the left are controlling so many different levers in culture that even as we see this Republican year, which I believe it will be and pray that it will be, there's ominous warning signs that are out there that we should all be honest about, that the the Republican nominee in Pennsylvania for Senate is down right now by a pretty considerable margin to a very, very extremist leftist candidate. And I bring up things like that because you're seeing something, Georgia's like a tie in the Senate race, and Arizona, you've got the 3 Republicans are down. My reason to bring that up is not to say they're going to lose. My hope is that they will all win. It's just to say we should all understand these tailwinds exist for the left that the Republican candidates don't get. So it is important that our nominee be, to your point, better than the alternative. And not just like better ideas, but better at articulating what they have to say, more prepared, and more ready to answer the real questions people have right now, which is like, my God, how do we make our society safe again? Like, how do we make it so we can go to Milwaukee, go out to dinner, and feel like we're safe and the people on the sidewalk with are safe? How do we make it so our kids aren't being taught intellectual poison in our schools? And we have to have those answers at the ready because the mainstream media is not going to help to deliver them to other people. They're going to try and ask the question in a way that makes you look like you're crazy in the way you answer it. And so, yes, I do agree with you. We've got by far better candidates that are better prepared, that really do want to help to save our state and country. I'll say that of everybody who's in the Republican primary for sure. And I appreciate that their heart's in the right place, even if I have my differences with them on some things. Those are minor things compared to what we see coming from the left, whether it's Evers or...
Two quick final questions. Did Richard Uihlein advise you to end your campaign?
No. I've had conversations with many friends, and I think pretty much to a person, anyone who's supporting me, that these conversations weren't wide. The most important conversation on this front was with my wife, Jessie. But no, I think pretty much everyone I've talked to about it said, look, you want to charge forward, and we're with you. But this is what the path looks like, and we should all be on board for what that path is.
And my other question, I know you don't intend to endorse either Clayfish or Michaels, but you've been running against both of them. Who do you think would have a better chance of beating Tony Evers?
Mark, that's a sneaky question. So look, I'm going to say this, and I know it's kind of a cop-out, but this is kind of a sneaky question too. I think, honestly, if either one of them is capable of answering those questions I just talked about right now, like what are they truly going to do to get parents, kids in a better situation for their future? What are they going to do to really honestly, and I mean get at it, like how are we going to get more people to want to be cops again? Can't just say you're going to fund those positions, but actually want to do the job and can express that level of leadership. They, as long as they can do that, will be able to beat Tony Evers, and I believe that in my heart of hearts. And again, come August 10th, I'll be there to help out whichever one of them wins the primary.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Sure thing. That's Kevin Nicholson, who, if you came in the middle, is ending his campaign for the